It's really my pleasure today to introduce today's webinar, Buying Time with Runnels, a climate adaptation tool for salt marshes. This presentation will be co-presented by Dr. Alice Besterman and Diane Brennan, and is really an outstanding example of co-produced work. The research is the result of discussions and workshops between scientists, including myself, and multiple conservation and management organizations centered on how to improve the long-term resilience and sustainability of our most important and iconic coastal habitats, salt marshes. The work on salt marshes, as I'm sure most of you know, is particularly pressing as this habitat supports numerous species of fish, birds, reptiles, and mammals, and its sustainability is threatened by the legacy of human alteration combined with high rates of sea level rise induced by climate change. As such, this project addresses the central and any CASC goal of understanding the impacts of climate change on fish and wildlife habitats, and also generating the knowledge required to inform management decisions and produce actionable results. It's part of the broader CASC research on management options for coastal adaptations to sea level rise. Our first presenter this afternoon will be Diana Brennan, who is the Wetlands Coordinator for Bristol County Mosquito Control Project. I met Diana a few years ago through the initial discussions on sustainability and management of salt marshes. Her degree in environmental science and a background in wetland consulting has made her a leader in the planning, permitting, and monitoring of water management projects at Bristol County Mosquito Control. In this capacity, she has contributed to the design and implementation of 6 projects using Runnels. Diana will be followed by Dr. Alice Besterman, who, after finishing her PhD in environmental science from the University of Virginia, came to work jointly at the Woodwell Climate Science Center, Buzzards Bay Coalition, NGO, and the CASC on the structure and function of coastal and estuarine ecosystems as they respond to global changes. I'm excited for her transition in January to assistant professor at Towson University in Maryland, as she will continue to work with us and will involve the next generation of CASC undergraduate and graduate student fellows. Together, Diana and Alice will describe the rationale, the practices, and the lessons learned from ongoing collaborative projects in salt marshes. Diana?
Thank you, Linda. And thanks everyone for having me here today to talk to you. As you mentioned, I'm the Wetlands Coordinator at Bristol County Mosquito Control. I like to say I'm a glorified ditch digger. We do water management here at Bristol County Mosquito Control. So I'm going to get right into it. So what is water management? Water management is one of our integrated pest management tools here at Bristol County Mosquito Control. It's a technique for reducing mosquito breeding habitat, so it's source reduction. Mosquito breeding habitat is defined by stagnant water with no fish predators. That's where the mosquitoes like to breed, the stinkier the better. And in salt marsh habitat, that generally means clogged ditches, whether those be agricultural ditches, mosquito control ditches, any kind of ditch in a salt marsh that clogs up creates those stagnant water conditions. Also surface water that's created as marshes subside or a sea level rise occurs. And also any Phragmites stands that are on that marsh or at the edges of that marsh can be excellent mosquito breeding habitat. So those are the types of areas we target as mosquito control. And our water management techniques throughout the years, we've maintained historic ditches, whether those be agricultural, mosquito control. We've created new ditches, that's less common these days, to manage surface water, to provide fish access, and to get salt water and reduce the height and vigor of Phragmites, all in an attempt to reduce those mosquito breeding habitats. And more recently, we've added creation of runnels to that toolkit. Our goals are to be effective. Our mandate is to reduce mosquitoes for public health. So we, as water management team, reduce the mosquito breeding habitat. We want our work to be sustainable. So we want it to require either no or infrequent maintenance. And we want to consider what potential future conditions might be in an area when we're planning projects. We don't want to create negative impacts, but we also want to think about, will sea level rise? Will there be a change that impacts what we do here? And we want to be responsible. We have a duty to avoid and minimize environmental impact. And we also like to recognize that there are opportunities that provide mosquito abatement and ecological benefits. So we look for those opportunities for collaboration and for those win-win kinds of projects. So as Linda mentioned, the salt marshes all over the Northeast are really stressed. They're changing really rapidly, and they're impacted by several stressors, human-induced and sea level rise. In these stress marshes, the open water pools that would normally recover and revegetate naturally aren't able to. And these areas are both an ecological concern as well as a mosquito control concern. And you can see in this photo, all those little black dots are mosquito pupae. They just love to breed in these little open water pools. So runnels are a really promising technique to manage the surface water and achieve some good results, both for mosquito control and for marsh restoration. So what are runnels? Runnels are shallow channels that are created in salt marsh to aid the tidal flow and to drain the standing water from the surface of the marsh. They're typically 6 to 12 inches wide and 10 to 12 inches deep, and they can be dug by hand, they can be dug by machine. They were originally developed in Australia and have been effectively used in the northeastern USA, mainly by Wenley Ferguson of Save the Bay out in Rhode Island in cooperation with Rhode Island's mosquito control for over a decade to accomplish mosquito control and ecological restoration goals. And what are they used for? So I use them to reduce mosquito breeding habitat. That's my goal. So this is in the, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but in the top left photo, that's that pool that had all the mosquito pupae in it. And on the top right, that's the pool area after a runnel was tied in. So you can see it's revegetating. It's no longer providing that mosquito breeding habitat. Runnels are also used to restore salt marsh vegetation in areas of subsidence. So this is a project Alice and I worked on at OCEANVIEW Farm, and these are actually her photos I'm using here on the slide. In the middle, you can see the area of subsidence, that open water on the marsh. And after the runnel was installed, it's starting to revegetate. And from a mosquito control perspective, they also provide fish access into deeper pools so they can eat the mosquito larvae there. So on the bottom left, you can see a deeper pool that was not drained of water, but fish have now been found in that pool, and they are excellent at eating lots of mosquito larvae. And we've even seen some baby eels, some elvers coming up into the runnels, and they also are known to eat mosquito larvae. So the material that comes out of the runnels is used to create habitat islands. So we add a little bit of elevation in areas of subsidence, and that allows some habitat to form that is suitable nesting habitat for something like a salt marsh sparrow. So it provides that additional value to the ecological restoration. As far as who's been using runnels in Bristol County, we have been working with a lot of great partners, mosquito control, of course, and some conservation organizations, Save the Bay, Buzzards Bay Coalition, Woodwell Climate Research Center, Mass Audubon. We've worked with the towns in Fairhaven and Dighton. We've worked with the local land trusts, DNRT in Dartmouth, and the Fairhaven Acushnet Land Preservation Trust in Fairhaven. So a broad range of folks coming together to use this technique. And what these partnerships allow us to do is to really draw from the strengths of each type of organization. So as an example, conservation organizations provide people like Alice who have a lot of scientific expertise. They can provide funding and grants to do research, a volunteer labor pool to literally come out with shovels and dig. And they also have a lot of experience with restoration, so they can advise on some restoration techniques that can really protect or enhance the environment. And from mosquito control, we do have some exemptions from some of the local permitting requirements and other things that sometimes make permitting these projects easier for us. So we're able to help get more of these projects off the ground by helping streamline the permitting process a little bit. And I'll get into that more later. We also have specialized equipment that has very low ground pressure, so we can bring excavators out onto the salt marsh. And our operators have a lot of salt marsh experience. They're used to working in those conditions, and they're very good at it. The landowners, of course, provide site access. Many of them also come out and work with us as a volunteer. And we certainly work with the regulatory agencies on the permitting aspects of these projects. And this is where we work in Massachusetts. This is Bristol County. So you see the state of Massachusetts here, and that black area is my county. And these are the projects we've done, the RUNNEL projects that we have been doing over the past several years. So our oldest is Broad Cove in Dighton, done in 2017. It was the first official RUNNEL project in Massachusetts. We then moved to the Cow Yard in Dartmouth. We did the pilot study in partnership with Buzzards Bay Coalition and Woodwell Climate Research Center with Alice at Little Bay in Fairhaven and Ocean View Farm in Dartmouth. In 2022, we started work at Allen's Pond in Dartmouth with Mass Audubon, and we are actually going out there next week with the machine to do some more with that project. And currently in the permitting phase, we have a project planned for the Winsagansett Marshes in Fairhaven. So we've been working with a lot of different partners on these, and I'm going to step through just a little bit of an example from these going backwards in time so you can see sort of the beginning to the end results. So this is the Allen's Pond project that we will be out at next week. And on the left, you can see this is the type of area of subsidence we often target. So it's not a distinct classic salt marsh pool. There's been pool creep. It's the marsh platform is degrading. The soil is becoming unconsolidated, and it starts to provide some really good mosquito breeding habitat, as well as being a problem for nesting birds and for the habitat value. And at Allen's Pond, we've done a lot of hand digging already, and we will be out there with the machine next week. And these are a group of Mass Audubon personnel and volunteers helping dig a runnel here. The Little Bay and Ocean View Farm pilot study, Alice was integral to doing the science and research work on that. We did both hand digging and machine digging. And then this spoil you can see in the photo with the excavator, these lumps of soil, that gets spread into shallow or to low mounds to create those habitat islands. And this is an example of an older project. We did the runnel in 2018. And by July of 2020, it was really starting to grow in from the sides. The water level had been dropped and the vegetation was starting to recover. And finally, our Broad Cove project, illustrating again how we do effective mosquito control with these runnel projects. We have the pool with the mosquito pupae, followed by a vegetated area of salt marsh. So one of the challenges with doing these projects in Massachusetts is that the permitting process is really quite involved. And I'm going to run down what my permitting process is. So I'm mosquito control, I'm exempt from local regulations. And so my permitting process is not applicable everywhere, but it's actually a little bit easier for me than for many others. So we have a pre-application site meeting. Then we review the draft applications with our partners and with regulators. We submit our final submission applications to Mass DEP for a water quality certificate. We do a pre-construction notification for the Army Corps. That includes getting CZM consistency compliance. And we also coordinate with the Natural Heritage Program if necessary. So we have mapping that tells us if we need to do that or not, or if we can follow our general guidelines. We then have to send out public notice. We have to respond to any comments. I send a notification letter to the Conservation Commission so they have a heads up that we're doing the project. Then we receive our approvals and can start. So this process is pretty arduous, and it's actually simpler for mosquito control. This took 6 to 9 months for each of these projects. And that level of effort means that we can only do one a year. And that's a problem because this is a really time-sensitive issue. The marshes are degrading really quickly, and we want to do more of these projects. We also have some challenges with our limitations for monitoring. We have very limited staff available for monitoring. It's mainly me, and I wear a lot of other hats too. I have a lot of other responsibilities. Occasionally our entomologist, Todd, will help. I know he's on the call, so shout out to Todd. We perform qualitative monitoring. So I have a checklist that I go through. I have photo stations, but we lack the resource for real quantitative data collection and analysis. And this can be problematic because, first of all, we have a duty to perform our tasks in an environmentally sensitive manner, avoiding an and minimizing impacts. So while we do have this qualitative information that's showing we are creating a net benefit, we don't have the real hard science data to back that up. And the regulators have a duty to protect the resources from inadvertent harm. So they really need evidence that the RUNNEL technique is safe and effective if they're going to reduce any of the permitting requirements. So the solution is to find an ALICE. We should partner with researchers to collect and analyze qualitative and extensive quantitative data. So here you can see Alice and her team collecting data at the OCEANVIEW farm sites. We can then provide those results to the broader community, including regulators. So when regulators are provided with the information they need, they can determine potential impacts more easily. The Army Corps in Massachusetts is currently updating their general permit, and they're using Alice's paper, Buying Time with Runnels, a climate adaptation tool for salt marshes, to inform those updates. They're taking her data into consideration when making these regulatory decisions. The updated regulations can then ease permitting requirements. So as an example, in Rhode Island's newly updated Army Corps general permit, runnels and habitat islands can be permitted under a much simpler self-verification process. And streamlining and making the permitting process more simple means that more of these projects can get done sooner by both mosquito control and by others. So what streamlined permitting might look like is, instead of having the pre-construction notification and everything that goes with it, with the long list of tasks to do and the wait for permit approvals, it could look something more like a self-verification application, which is a simple one-page form, which we would then coordinate with Natural Heritage, send out our notification letters, and it would be quite streamlined to get some of these projects started. And again, I just want to make a note that this is the mosquito control permitting, which is a little bit different than other entities. So in the future, we want to continue to make progress with this work. We want to spread the word, to educate and train new practitioners, to publish more papers. We want to obtain funding if we need specialized equipment, if there are staffing needs, need for consultants, etc. We want to work together with the community to sensibly streamline the permitting process. And we want to continue to pool our resources to achieve success, both in ecological restoration and mosquito control. And of course, we want to contribute to and continue to learn from the pool of knowledge that groups like this really bring to the table. So thank you very much. I appreciate being here today, and I'm going to hand it off to Alice, who can speak about her work with the Runnels.
Thanks, Diana. While we're making this transition, I see a little bit of discussion about maybe some visibility issues. Can folks see the screen now? Not sure necessarily how to get an answer for this. All right, well, I'm going to get into it.
It looks good to me, Alice.
Okay, all right, great.
If you're having an issue in the audience, feel free to chat. But I think that the issue may just have been that the person who reported the problem hadn't touched their screen and it just went into sleep mode.
Got it. Great. All right. Thank you, Diana, for that introduction to the project we've been working on, Runnels, and some history of that, how they've been used. So what I'm going to talk about at this point is our side of the project we've been working on with Diana. So from the scientific perspective, what have we tried to add, help with in order to expand the science on runnels and better understand how they can be used in salt marshes? So we began our partnership with a Southeast New England program grant with Diana and a number of other scientists and resource managers from the organizations I have cited up here in 2019. And one of the first things we did is early in 2020, we held a workshop that was attended by 70 stakeholders and scientists that were interested in runnels and had expertise in salt marshes. At that workshop, we took a really focused look at runnels as an adaptation technique. What are the problems marshes are facing that runnels might be used to address? We looked at that history of runnels and thought about the mechanisms of how they work. And we also learned about several case studies of runnel projects. We took that information, combined it with a literature review and case study data available from our partner Wenley Ferguson at Winnipeg Marsh in Rhode Island, and we produced this paper that we published in Estuaries and Coasts. So I'm going to dive into some parts of this paper now. Diana's done a really wonderful job giving us a history of runnels, introducing how they work and what they're for. And so what I'm going to focus on starting here is understanding those mechanisms of change in marshes. So we've talked about already that sea level rise combined with modifications made to marshes by people is what's driving these changes. So I just wanted to put this in the context of our classic accepted model of how these pools and pans or shallow water areas work is that they don't contribute to net marsh loss. And so the idea has been that even if one of these pops up or even expands, if you take a landscape view of the marsh, enough of these features are draining and revegetating elsewhere that you don't have net loss of vegetated marsh area. But several studies over the last few years have shown that this is changing. These features are expanding in size and in number across both the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic of the United States. There are several reasons for this. So first, we have accelerated sea level rise. Globally, the rate is around 3 millimeters per year, but in the Northeast, it's faster than that, closer to 5 millimeters per year. And that rate is actually approaching a threshold tipping point at which models predict these pools and pans, even in a pristine marsh, would no longer be able to naturally drain and revegetate. On top of that, marshes are facing sediment deficits for various reasons. In an estuary like Buzzards Bay, the waters that flood marshes are actually naturally very clear. So there's very little sediment available to deposit on the marsh surface and help the marsh vertically accrete. In other places, dams hold sediment back in rivers. And also in marshes like in southeastern New England, like Buzzards Bay and Narragansett, we have a very narrow tide range. So our marshes are considered microtidal. And that's that the tide range is a meter or less. And what that means is on an average high tide, even if you do have sediment available to come into the marsh and help that marsh vertically increase its position, it's not reaching very far into the marsh. And so we get these deficits, especially in the interior platform. And finally, our model of these dynamic natural marshes that vertically increase in proportion with sea level rise and pans and pools that are draining and revegetating comes mostly from pristine marshes. And what we found is there aren't very many of these pristine marshes, especially in the East Coast of the United States. The best estimate for how many marshes in the East Coast of the US have been ditched in the 1930s is around 90%. And the way ditches were done historically was to dig a very deep, very straight channel. And then that material was piled along the sides of it in these long linear impoundments. There are also these features called embankments that colonial farmers put into marshes in order to manage water flow and increase their production yields of vegetation there. The legacy effects of both of these processes on the marsh platform is what people call this waffle maple syrup configuration. You have these long linear high points and these depressions in between them. So we have sediment deficits, a fast rate of sea level rise, and long linear impoundments on the marsh surface that basically function like levees, trapping water. So taken together, you have higher high tides coming into the marsh. That water gets trapped in these depressions. There, it can drown the plants. And that shallow water then has the potential to expand outward very rapidly, which can kill vegetation and convert the interior marsh platform into open water. So understanding that that's where we're coming from, there's been a number of projects that have begun to use runnels for conservation to get this standing water off the marsh and help revegetation. One of these is a project led by Wenley Ferguson with Save the Bay in Rhode Island at Winnipogue Marsh. So Winnipogue is a grid ditched back barrier marsh, and I have an aerial image of it right here from 2011. And as you can see, all of these little, what looked like to be like pools are actually pools on this marsh. So it's very heavily impacted by standing water. And this led to a project that was developed by Wenley to use runnels to try and get some of this water off the marsh. Runnels were created in phases between 2012 and 2014, and the monitoring record is really great here. It extends from 2011 all the way up to 2019. Monitoring was done of vegetation along these black lines, which are transects for monitoring at this marsh. Here's a before after photo from this project. So on the left, you can see in 2011, there's this impounded water and a loss of vegetation. And very shortly after Runnels began to be put into this marsh, you can see water has come off the marsh surface and revegetation is occurring. Looking at the data that was collected from one of those transects at that marsh, I have plotted those data here over the 2011 to 2019 period. And we can look at the percent cover of various constituents on the marsh surface. In 2011, before any of the runneling work began, you can see that the top three types of cover in the marsh are Spartina alterniflora, macroalgae, and impounded water. Runnel work began in 2012. And by 2014, you can see really tremendous changes on the marsh platform. Algae decreased to near zero. Water also drained off the surface. We see bare peat increasing as a result of losing that water and algae. And you see these early colonizers coming in. So Salicornia really boomed between 2011 and 2014 after the runnels were put in place, and a little bit of an increase in Spartina alterniflora cover. Moving ahead to 2019, we see that early colonizer Salicornia has dropped off. Spartina alterniflora has remained steady, and some high marsh species, in here we see Disticlus spicata actually increased its cover at this marsh. And so this is a really great record to demonstrate how runnels can work in a marsh that was being heavily impacted by impounded standing water. So moving on to the experiment that we have designed in collaboration with all of our partners in Buzzards Bay. I'm going to describe that experiment and describe some of our early results from that work. So arising out of our discussions at the workshop and various discussions following that was this need for data coming out of controlled experiments. So as Diana mentioned, the entities that have been leading these projects are not only limited in the resources they have to monitor vegetation, but there's a large suite of things that we're interested in how they might change in marshes with runnels, soil properties, elevation, sediment dynamics. And the groups that have been doing runnel projects don't necessarily have the staff and team and resources to look at all of those variables in a controlled experimental context. And so that's what we set out to do. We work in two marshes in the Buzzards Bay estuary, one marsh in the town of Fairhaven and one in the town of Dartmouth. And the questions that we're after are if runnels consistently drain expanding shallow water areas, and if these drained areas consistently revegetate. And these marshes differ in a number of ways, and we're exploiting those differences to look at how runnels function along gradients of elevation and also of marsh degradation. These marshes differ in a number of other environmental characteristics as well, which we're able to look at how runnels are functioning in these different environments. We're conducting a replicated BACI design study. And what that stands for is before after control impact. It means we're studying all of our sites before the runnels were put in place, after we put the runnels in place. And we're monitoring both control or reference sites as well as impact sites where we have put those runnels in place. At each of these 2 marshes, we have 5 experimental sites and 5 reference sites, giving us a total of 20 sites to monitor as a part of this study. And we're looking at a really large suite of variables and how they change. Vegetation, in addition to elevation, soil, physical and chemical processes and characteristics, water levels, water quality, decomposition, as well as other environmental variables. One of our key variables of interest is, of course, water level. We're monitoring water level with hobo water level loggers deployed in wells in the marsh platform like the one you see here. In this figure, I am showing you water level data collected from one of our sites. Water level is shown here on the y-axis, and the dashed line shows you where the marsh surface is. The light blue line shows the high frequency water level data that is recorded every 15 minutes, and the dark blue line is the minimum water level recorded each day. And so that's functioning as an indicator of the position of the water table in these marshes. So before the runnel was put in place, you can see there are these prolonged periods where there's impounded standing water above the marsh surface, here, here, and here. We put the runnels in place during the winter between 2020 and 2021. And during this after period, you can see that there has been significant change in water levels at this marsh. We've restored tidal hydrology, and we no longer have these long periods where the water levels appear as if the conditions are ponded on the marsh. That water level data corresponds with this site here at OCEANVIEW Farm in Dartmouth. So on the left, you see standing water and a loss of vegetation had occurred. This is from October 2020. And this photo here on the right is from August 2022. And so there's really been quite significant revegetation in just a span of 2 years at this site. A benefit of what we're able to do as the scientific collaborators on this project is to get in the weeds with the statistics on these data. So here I am showing you our modeled results from water table heights across both of our marshes and all of our sites where we're monitoring water levels. So I have water table height, that's that minimum level each day, that dark blue line, over the entire period from all of the sites we're monitoring here on the y-axis. I have the before period here, before runnels were put in place on the left, and the after period on the right. Our reference sites are shown in blue, and so you can see the average water table height has decreased at our reference sites as well, but not as much as it did at the runnel sites, where it decreased much more dramatically. Accounting for using a mixed linear model and accounting for all the things that we need to account for in statistics like these, we see that we actually do have a significant difference where the water table has dropped at our runnel sites relative to our reference sites. The reference sites have decreased by about 2 centimeters during this period, whereas the runnel sites decreased by about 6 centimeters over this time period. We also have some early data looking at how revegetation has been occurring. So here I am showing you percent cover of bare peat at all of our sites. I have percent cover from 0 to 100% on the y-axis. And here on the left, I am showing you the reference sites. The pink box is 2020, so before runnels were put in place. And here in blue, in this blue-green color, is after the runnels were put in place from the year 2021. So this actually doesn't include the data we've just collected from this past summer, where revegetation has been even more significant than it was in 2021. As of 2021, we see that the reference sites look about the same between the year before and the year after runnels were put in place. But when we look at our runnel sites, we see this significant decrease in the amount of bare peat cover where runnels were put in place. So we see that this significant decrease in the amount of bare peat exposed where runnels have been put in. So next steps and conclusions. An important point is that fundamentally our research is showing is mirroring the observations and monitoring that's been done so far in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And this suggests that our marshes we're studying are not fundamentally different, and the processes are not fundamentally different from where runnels have already been tried. We see drainage of that water to just below the soil surface, which is what we want, not to have gone too deep, just below the soil surface so the majority of the soil remains saturated. And we also see revegetation occurring. Our next steps are to analyze the 2 years post-installation data set that we have. We want to explore the effects of elevation, how degraded and unconsolidated the peat is, and what the effect of that is on how effective the runnel can be. And our hope is to continue monitoring, not just through, well, we're planning to continue monitoring through 2023, and we hope to continue monitoring these sites for much longer to understand what those long-term effects and processes are going to look like, and also to look at all of those ecosystem effects that we're interested in and how they're all changing with the drainage and revegetation. And a main goal, of course, is to share these results with decision makers. Diana has already outlined how critical getting these data to regulators and other decision makers is. Not only regulators, but landowners, restoration, ecologists that are trying to decide if runneling is the right technique for their marsh and or if it can be adapted to their marsh. We really need to get these data out there so that all of these different parties can make these decisions. And with that, I just want to acknowledge all of our wonderful partners, including Diana, all of the students and interns that have worked on the project, and our funders. And I think at this point we can take questions.